Knowing that if the doctors had not made mistakes, I would not have CP, makes me frustrated. It is almost unbearable that it was a pattern for the doctor, and not just one mistake.
I'm here today with Astrid from Denmark, and she is living with cerebral palsy. So thanks for coming along and chatting to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for talking with me.
No problem, it's a pleasure. Okay, so could you tell me in your own words, what is cerebral palsy?
Cerebral palsy, or CP, is a group of disorders that affect movement and the ability to maintain balance and posture. In some cases, it can also lead to other impairments, for example, problems with hearing and vision or cognitive difficulties. It is the most common motor disability in childhood, but don't misunderstand me, it doesn't suddenly disappear when you turn 18. Unfortunately, it is a lifelong disorder, since there is no cure. CP develops before, during or soon after birth. Approximately 17 million people around the world are living with CP. How the individual is affected by CP depends on which part of the brain is damaged. It varies from almost non-existent to very profound. For some, it is weakness in one hand, whereas for me it is an almost complete lack of control over my motor functions.
Okay, so although you don't have control over your motor functions, your body is fine and healthy. So the problem is that you can't control your body movements because your brain doesn't communicate properly with your body. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. My body is fine and healthy, but I cannot control my body movements.
Okay. So what are the difficulties that you face in life because of cerebral palsy?
Because of my CP, I have difficulties with controlling my movements. I'm trapped in a body that does not obey my instructions. My brain damage causes that my muscles are hyperactive, and I have many involuntary movements. My body often sits in a weird position. For instance, my arms are often lifted up near my shoulders with bent elbows and wrists. When they do this, I call them my swans. Just like the animal, they have a temper and are quite stubborn. It is rare that they do what I want them to do. When I want to make a conscious movement, I have to think carefully every time. If I, for example, want to grab something, first, I have to think through the movements I will need. Then I have to stretch my arm, open my hand, move my arm towards the object, and finally close my hand around the object. While doing this, I have to control my other muscles and try to avoid them moving. So it is actually many movements to just do one thing. Therefore, it usually fails when I want to make a conscious movement. That's why I sit in a wheelchair and have assistance 24 hours a day. As you can hear, my voice is mechanical. I cannot speak through my mouth.
So you use a communication device to speak. So why is it that you can't speak, but others with cerebral palsy can? And is it that you're totally non-verbal, or can you say some things?
As I mentioned earlier, CP affects people very differently because it depends on where the brain injury is located and how big it is. It is necessary to move, tense or relax the muscles in your face at the right time to be able to speak. There are muscles in the lips, tongue and throat, as well as your cheeks and jaw. These muscles I cannot control either. Therefore, I cannot speak through my mouth. Eating is easier, since it requires fewer muscles, but it is still difficult, and I need to concentrate when I eat. Therefore, I eat a major part of my food through a stomach tube.
Can I ask whether you're in pain?
Yes, unfortunately, I am in pain constantly since my muscles tighten. My body moves constantly in a purposeless pattern, and my limbs often sit in an unnatural way. Furthermore, I often hurt myself by hitting something. However, I am very good at ignoring pain, and I have a very high pain threshold. I rarely notice that I have hurt myself. Once I discovered that I had gotten 2 large skin abrasions by looking at my arms. I had not noticed any pain when I got injured. I often have bruises and sores without knowing when I have injured myself. Furthermore, my immune system is not working as well as it should. My CP puts a lot of stress on my body, and it is tiring to move constantly. Therefore, I get sick very easily. For instance, I often have blisters in my mouth, which is very painful. My recovery time is also longer than others, since I have a bad immune system. To sum up, I am very familiar with pain.
I saw in your Instagram post that you've now had the vaccine, so that must be a great relief for you. I'm glad to see that. So the cause of your cerebral palsy, did you suffer some sort of trauma which caused the cerebral palsy?
Yes, I suffered a trauma during my birth. The hospital made several mistakes and was not able to get me out in time. When I finally was delivered, no life-giving scream could be heard. I was in a dead-like condition, far from the rest of the world. I was cold. I was bluish. I did not breathe. Every second mattered. I had to be intubated, and I briefly received cardiac massage. As a consequence of the lack of oxygen during birth, I have CP.
So what are your feelings then towards the doctors that made the mistakes during your birth? How do you feel that knowing that if it weren't for the mistakes that you wouldn't have cerebral palsy?
I would wish that they had not made any mistakes during my birth. When I think of the midwife and the doctor, I feel frustrated. The doctor, who was responsible, had made mistakes before, ultimately resulting in the baby dying. A few years after I was born, he was put on a list of the worst doctors in Denmark because he kept making mistakes. Knowing that if the doctors had not made mistakes, I would not have CP, makes me frustrated. It is almost unbearable that it was a pattern for the doctor and not just one mistake.
No, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's terrible, especially knowing that the doctor had made other mistakes with other children too. That's terrible. But I'm glad that the Danish medical authorities have finally caught up with him. So that's a relief. Can I ask, does cerebral palsy get worse throughout life?
Cerebral palsy is a non-progressive disorder. This means that CP does not get worse over time, though the exact symptoms can change over a person's lifetime.
So you rely heavily on help from assistants. Do you live alone? And what do the assistants do for you?
Yes, I live alone in an apartment in Copenhagen. As I have told you, I need to have helpers 24 hours a day. So, I do not have that much privacy, as you can imagine. They assist me with all my daily activities. Everything that I need my arms for, they help me with.
I understand that you struggle with having new assistants and they have to learn the job. Does that happen often?
It happens. I have had assistants since I was around 5 years old, so I've had to train many assistants.
Okay. So coming back to the topic of your speech then, how do you use your communication device?